show at the Berkeley Marina. 3 a.m. when no one will be found. All I got in mind is a Boone's Farm jug of wine. Smash a bottle in the parking lot. But considering our luck, we'll get busted by the cops. Instead of steps, we'll go to jail. Another lesson learned and failed.
All right. Thank you there, party people. Today is February 2nd, 2023. Good morning to y'all. Sorry about the late addition to the show today. Honestly, today was just a clusterfuck of bad luck and just bad timing. We all go through those kind of days, and this was just one of those days where it was like Occam's razor just the entire time. It was just the worst that could go wrong went wrong. Every bus I needed, I missed. Every important item I looked for shopping for, they didn't have it. So, with all of my time being spent elsewhere and trying to get everything set up for my morning routines, and I don't know about you guys, but like I deeply rely on my morning routines. The shit that I have to do in the morning is always the most important stuff that I have to do all day. And it's usually the shopping and all that shit. So for me, mornings always suck, but that seems to be like that's when my day really starts, and I'm up at 6 anyway. So ordinarily, I would have something written for you guys. Now, I've mentioned before that I do not script this show. I don't. Um, uh, the show itself is not scripted. There are segments where I will script, not necessarily script, but I will put in my notepad about 6 or 8 paragraphs long. It's usually pretty long enough to read for about 10 minutes, and it's a great way to get my point across with you guys, but also manage to salvage the time that I have to do it. And unfortunately, because today was such a clusterfuck, I never had the time to even find or I never found the time to write out the script. And so this is just me freeballing it for the entire half hour. Now, occasionally I do this, but ordinarily I have something written for you so that way it's well said, it's concise, directly to the point, and there should always be a not maybe not necessarily a theme, but there should always be a bigger point to what you're saying, and you should always have that um at least a 5 minute segment where you've written everything down, you know exactly what you want to say and how you should say it. That's important to me. All right, so we're going to go ahead and begin with our ritual. And I'm not sure if Chris is going to be here today. I think she might be mad at me. I'm not sure. Um, I'm just letting you know. Hopefully, I'll see you there. So yeah, what's it called? I got in a not really an argument with my friend, but she and I just I don't know. We agreed to disagree. Now, the morning bud today, this strain is still under the cherry gelato, so it's still under that. But right, as of tomorrow, we'll have a new strain and be able to brag about the new weed that's out. So, everyone, take your lighters out. Cheers. Delicious. Now, one issue that I really wanted to get to, of course, is the reason for our actual title of Posers Suck. And I really wanted to get into this because I'm not sure if if everybody did this, but when I was a high schooler, that was always like the biggest insult that you can give to anybody was by calling them a poser, because I ran with a very heavily um, musical crowd, and we all pretty, it's not like that we all worship the same music, but we all had a similar taste. And I'm worried that I'm sorry, give me one more second. So again, the worst thing you could ever be called at that time was a poser, and it was because we all took the music very seriously, and being a poser means that you don't stand for any of this shit, and that you wear the band shirts, you wear the all the accoutrement, you've done all, you have all that filler, but you're not the real deal, and as a teenager, being called a poser was, I mean, that was like fighting words. Like, that was enough reason to not just dislike somebody, but was enough reason to straight up fight that person right then, right there. So, whoever just joined us, welcome to SES. Again, we're talking about music in itself, and we're talking about posers. So I was recently excited because Green Day is at its 30-year anniversary of Dookie. And so I really didn't think I needed a script for this. Like I said, I normally write out certain shit. But we're going to be talking about Green Day's 30-year-old album, Dookie. And there's no fucking album that, in my opinion, in '94 meant more than that album. Um, Green Day's Dookie had been suppressed for, the punk scene that was coming out of the Bay Area in California. Now, the late 80s gave us these really great bands like from the Bay Area that were bands like uh, Bad Religion, bands like Screeching Weasel, of course, bands like Operation Ivy. And so with this came a little subset of music that no one had heard yet, because it was only popular in a place called Gilman Street in Berkeley, California. So at the time, most people were into either grunge, but hip hop was also making its really biggest stride around the 90s. And so California became this like haven for music. And California brought you the hair metal, brought you the thrash scene, and a lot of punk. But the hair metal scene that had dominated the 80s was getting very stale, and you had bands from Cinderella to Rat, and every band basically sounded the same. And so we were lucky that in '91 you had Nirvana just break that door down and start a musical revolution that was reluctantly and acquiescently called grunge. Now, again, I did a episode on new metal and talked about how we always hated that name, and grunge was no different. Nirvana hated the name grunge. To them, they were just a punk band. But being from Seattle and knowing that they're from I think Olympia, Washington. So the Seattle scene was thriving now because you had the other bands like Pearl Jam and Soundgarden and Alice in Chains. And again, in my opinion, these bands didn't sound the same, and I thought it was strange to lump them all under grunge when there were different sounds. Alice in Chains sounded more metal. Um, uh, Nirvana sounded more punk, and Pearl Jam sounded more classic rock. Um, they had a very old school guitar sound, and we basically got Pearl Jam because of the death of Andy Wood in Mother Love Bone, which opened the door for Pearl Jam. And there was a guy from born in Evanston, Illinois, Eddie Vedder. Eddie Vedder went out, played with the band, and history was made. So now it's 94. Excuse me. The pop music was still um, was actually becoming the little brother, and rock was getting much bigger, and it was becoming a rock and hip hop thing. And of course, you had your Mariah Careys and your other singers as well. Um, uh, welcome back, Chris. I remember this because I worship it. So now you have bands like I said, you had the regular four, but then you had bands coming out um, like the Toadies, Silverchair, and then these other bands that were slowly coming out. Even in '91, Tool had come out, and Tool was not considered grunge because I don't know. By '93, when Undertow had come out, they were looked at as a metal band, where Alice in Chains should have been looked at as a metal band as well. So as the grunge era started to get more and more stale, you had Headbangers Ball, which really was the voice of the metal community at the time for MTV. If you were around in the 90s, you couldn't find metal videos unless you waited really late at night. And so on MTV, they had Headbangers Ball, which was followed by Liquid Television, which was the original Adult Swim. So when people would tell me about Adult Swim, I would say, oh, is it like Liquid Television? Of course, no one remembered what I was talking about. So as the Headbangers Ball was the voice of metal, suddenly they started playing bands like Stone Temple Pilots, Nirvana, Soundgarden, the bands that you were hearing all day anyway. So Headbangers Ball was supposed to be our little oasis away from that. And it's not that the music was bad, it was that it was overplayed and people were just getting tired of hearing it. And so Headbangers Ball started playing grunge albums, and it was starting to piss off the Headbangers Ball fans. Now, 94 comes in. This is the year we are going to lose one of the greatest musical minds of all time, Kurt Cobain. And before that can happen, the East Bay sound that was coming from California had finally gained enough traction to bust through that door. Now, there was a man named Rob Cavallo who was also a musician, failed musician turned producer, looked for bands for Warner Brothers, even helped for Interscope. And he comes across a little cassette tape. It was a brown cassette tape. And it's funny that would be the two songs that would later be on the album Dookie. And it actually came in this like brown tape, this actually brown Dookie colored tape cassette player, cassette. So they went out he pops it in, and it was the first demo version of Longview, which If you know the song very well, you know it has a very a cycling kind of rotative bass line. And so as that bass line goes in, I want to say that the only difference was the toms, I think. But for the most part, it sounded exactly like Longview. You could tell the mixing and the production of the song was not really altered with, and Rob Cavallo really wanted to keep that sound that they had. Now, you also have to remember this is around the time that music had gone and switched from the old reel to reels. People were still doing that, but a lot of people were switching over to digital medias and just easier, cheaper ways to produce albums. And so Green Day makes in you know all through late '93, they start recording for Dookie. Billy Joe Armstrong actually managed to get the entire vocal track of every single song, including All by Myself. Managed to get all of those done in one take. And the guys from Warner Brothers had never even seen that before. They were so used to dealing with pop stars that have to do 50 takes for one song to keep the continuity in case of editing processes. Now, Green Day took a pay cut so that way they can mix their own songs and help produce. Now, that's a part of the music industry that very few people understand. In order to produce your own songs, you're going to have to take out some money. You're going to have to cut yourself down a little bit because the contracts will never include self production. They want the machine to make your music, they want you to play it. But in the long run, they want to take what you've done, mix it their way, and have you play it for the lack of better word for the long view. And so Green Day had come out with Longview as their first initial track. They after that came out with Basket Case, and about 3 more singles came from that album. And if you are lucky and you actually own this album, if you own it on CD, the best thing is to do is to check the back of it because it might be worth something. There is a Ernie from Bert and Ernie that is on the back of the album when you see all the crowd. Now, if you happen to own the copy of the record that has that original Ernie in it, there's a lot of collectors that will pay a lot of money for that. And I would love to go in there and pull out mine. And then I was just wondering, like what got other people into it, if anybody is still here or listening, Chris, if you're listening, I always wonder what's the first Green Day song that you heard, maybe not liked but heard, because again, all the music came out in '94. Now, or Dookie came out in '94, and then they were considered pop because people didn't like the idea of Green Day moving over to Warner Brothers or Interscope or anything like that. And the truth was that these guys were starving artists. They were literally starving artists. Green Day had spent time living in abandoned warehouses, living in garages, cars. We all know Trey had to steal his father's bookmobile just to do that. And so you can't argue with somebody when they're starving, you just can't. Time of Your Life, it was everywhere, says Chris. That came out in '97, which was 3 years after Dookie actually came out. The funny thing that Green Day is, like, the best thing I think about the band itself is that after they had come out with all these singles on Dookie, they were called sellouts because they were starving and they finally got food. And honestly, with or not honestly, but there's a it's a fact that Billy would purposely meet up with guys from different labels that they knew they weren't even gonna take. But they would take the interviews to bullshit them simply because they would get a free meal out of it. I mean, that's how literally hungry these guys were. So 3 guys coming from the Bayside area of Gilman Street and living in Berkeley, California. They steal a bookmobile and never look back. They ditch high school. They pick up the young kid Trey, and Trey is just a young fucking prodigy. The kid's just a natural. And so, if you've ever heard Green Day's original drummer was not as good. So, what Green Day did that no other band did after Dookie's success, and they kind of wanted to stick it to the critics by calling them pop music. So they created the next album in 1995 in August called Insomniac. Now, Insomniac was a much different album from Dookie. Dookie now 30 years. So that means in 2 years it will be it will definitely be their turn. And so Insomniac was a album that was so damn good because it was a big middle finger to the critics. Now, after that happened, this is where we're going to get into where Chris first heard them. All right. So before that happened, they had taken some money and gone back to their old albums, Kerplunk and Slappy Hour. Now, these 2 albums were full LPs that were on Lookout Records. Now, Lookout Records was, of course, a much smaller they were smaller than Sub Pop that grunge used to use. So what Green Day did that no one else has ever done was go in their own pocket to not only promote these albums, but to start reprinting them so that way they can be out for wide release. So they kind of cleaned the sound up a little bit, but they still kept it the way it was. And so there were certain like Bad Religion albums that they wanted that type of sound to stick with it. And so we were given 2 whole new albums that we never would have heard if we had just sticking with Warner Brothers. So I applaud them for that because those 2 albums are some of the most important albums of my history and my life. Now, Chris says, I hate when they call people sellouts because that's the point. You become an artist, not to share your gift and hopefully be successful, and no one works for free. In my opinion, there are 2 different ways of selling out. By mass releasing your work onto a major label and being mad at a band like that, Elvis Costello said it perfectly, saying people were upset with Green Day about Dookie because they got on a major label. To him, he said, quote, to me, that's like buying a box of cornflakes and eating the cardboard. And it was a great quote because he's saying you're not listening to the actual music and the product. You're simply looking at who is paying for it, which is the dumbest way to look at it. And one of those actual people that spit on them were a couple of members of the band The Donnas. Now, if you do not remember them, good for you, because they were a one-hit wonder garbage band. All right, they were garbage. They would compare themselves to like No Doubt, and they were an all-girl band. That's not why they sucked. Gwen Stefani was amazing in No Doubt. It was just simply just bad music. It was just corny. And the fact that they had the audacity to hate Green Day and spit on them for, you know, what they had to put themselves through, and what they did was reinvent punk rock and gave it to all of us, where we can not only appreciate this album 30 years later, but appreciate the albums that we never would have heard in the first place had it not been for guys like Rob Cavallo and Green Day. All right. So happy 30th anniversary to Green Day's Dookie. I love that album. It is not my favorite album, but it definitely was what brought me into the world of Green Day. Now, that is my time, and I told you I'd be able to fill this time up with no problem. You guys want to talk Green Day? I can talk for hours. Love you guys. Thanks again, Chris, for always helping out and supporting. Don't forget to check us out. Any platform you put Useless Agent under, you'll find us. Just look under Useless Agent. Don't forget to end your tweets with hashtag free Ben's doink right over here, because Ben Shapiro is the most sexually repressed man of all time, and someone needs to let that thing breathe. All right. So thank you guys so much. Love you guys. And as always, I will catch you on the other side. And I said it right this time. Screw you, Chris. Stay cheesy, my friends.
Said that I'd meet ya at the Berkeley Marina, 3 a.m. when no one will be found. All I got in mind is a Boone's Farm jug of wine. Smash up